Congratulations.
Thanks, Mom.
Yeah, great job, kiddo.
Thanks, Grandpa.
So, what's your 15-year plan?
Oh no, not this again.
Do you have a job yet?
Give me some time. Every time he comes over, he makes me feel like a kid again.
I don't know. Jobs seem hard.
Your estimated wait time is 97 minutes.
97 minutes? Come on!
All right, here it is. I pulled the MLS data on this luxurious short sale, and it seems to be priced pretty appropriately according to the CMA, and depending on your DP, you may not even have to pay PMI.
Huh?
Who's on clock for steps? I just went. Bro.
It's not working. The only choices I have is a lion, wagon, and zebra.
Sounds like you're gonna lose.
She really is beautiful.
Thank you. Got it?
Congratulations again.
Thank
You got it from here, okay? All right, bye-bye.
Bye. Honey.
Sir, what's your number?
What number?
Next.
The test results are in. The diagnosis is rheumatoid arthritis.
What's a rumored artist? Excuse me?
Yes?
I thought refills on juice were free.
I'll go ask my manager.
Good.
Oh my gosh, I am so sorry. Oh my goodness, are you okay?
Adulting is hard.
Rumored arthritis, whatever that is. Hopefully, none of us come down with that this week. A couple of years ago, actually, my very first vehicle was a pickup truck. And I loved it, right? I mean, it was my favorite vehicle. It was a Chevy Z71 pickup truck. And there was something special about jumping in this pickup truck. And as I'm driving, I'm just a little bit above everybody else. And I loved it. I loved everywhere I went. I mean, you go to the drive-thru and you're like reaching out and you're grabbing it. And one thing led to another, and my transmission went out in the pickup truck. And it actually turned out better for me to just sell the truck for the truck and get the money, and I was able to buy a new car. But the fascinating thing about the selling of the truck is I didn't want to sell it to anybody I knew because I was afraid that if I sold it to somebody I knew, and then it ended up not working like the next week, I would feel so guilty. So I'd rather do that to somebody I don't know, right? And you're the same way, right? So I put it on Craigslist, and I end up selling it just a little bit below what I'd asked. I mean, it was a great deal. He paid me cash, and he drove it off. And that night, I got a call from him. He said, I'm glad you told me the transmission was not quite working up to par because I didn't make it a mile down the street before it died. You told me it's on me, but good thing my father-in-law is a transmission artist, and I'll just get it towed straight there. And I was like, shoo, I sold it just in time. Have you ever had that moment? But here's what I did is I took the cash, right? And I just sold this truck. And I mean, it was one of those things, if it had been a friend of mine, I would have felt so bad. I'd be like, hey, take your money. I mean, I know we shook on it, but I took the cash that he gave me, and I found this Toyota Camry that was just incredible. Like, I loved it. It was a newer model. It was a Toyota Camry. I thought it was just the coolest thing. So I went and we made this deal, and, I felt so special because, like, if you've ever paid cash for a vehicle, and this wasn't like a brand new car, okay? But this is the money that I'm planning on. Like, I'm telling him this is all I have, and then over here is just the reserve, just in case he doesn't go for it, and then it's like, hey, and you pull out the cash. It's like, all right, $3,000 sounds good, whatever it was. I bought it, no payments, life was good. You know what I felt? I felt like in that moment, I had it. Like, I've got it. I've got it all together. I've got a new car to me. Life is good. But you know what happened? I was a student pastor in Wise County at the time. And in Wise County, if you've ever driven through, you drive on 114, just keep on driving west, what you'll find is just about everybody and their dog owns a pickup truck. So I'm excited about this Toyota Camry. I go and park in the parking lot, and next thing you know, like it's a Wednesday night, all of the students are here, and I look, and my little Camry is the only little car amongst all of these giant trucks. And I'm watching as like 16-year-old boys and girls alike are jumping out of these trucks, and I'm like, I went from I've got it to I've lost it in a matter of moments, right? And what is that takes us from I've got it to I've lost it? Maybe for you, you've got a child that's got a birthday coming up, and you were so excited about throwing this birthday party. In fact, your little girl wants nothing more than a mermaid birthday party, so you go all out, right? You go and you get the cake that's made, that's got mermaids on it, and you're like, you rent the pool, and everything is great, and next thing you know, you invite all the friends, and everybody loves it. They all walk away with the Little Mermaid DVD. I don't know if that's even a party favor, but sure, you just give it away, and their parents are like, you gave us a DVD, we don't have, what is this? Anyway, but you have this party and your daughter just loves it. Your kid, whatever the party theme is, they just love it. And you go to bed that night thinking, I've got it. I am the parent of the year. This is exciting. And then you look on Facebook or Pinterest at other mermaid parties, and you realize that there's actually people that hire real mermaids to swim in the water with their girls, and there's really people that go to such extravagant measures to have the Little Mermaid at the birthday party, and everything inside of you begins to just feel so low, and you went from I've got it to I've lost it. I mean, what is that? Maybe for you, you went on the perfect vacation. You were so excited about vacation, and it was an incredible experience. You got all the kids together. Y'all went somewhere, and you had the greatest time. I mean, you took a lot of pictures. Life was good. Your kids had fun. They're still talking about the memories. And you go home, and you go into the office, and you've been telling your colleague about the vacation you had. And they say something to the effect of, oh, that's great. I remember when that was our vacation too. Now and you're like, oh, you went from what? I've got it to I've lost it. I mean, it was such an incredible vacation, and just in a matter of a statement, in the matter of a sentence, you just kind of sink down into your chair and think, well, maybe it wasn't that great of a vacation anyway. We went from being, man, I am A-okay to I've lost it. I want to ask a question. What is that? What is the gap that's there? What is it inside of us that causes us to go from I've got it all of a sudden to I've lost it? What is it that causes us to think that, man, we've got it all together, and then we come in contact with somebody that they're not trying to brag, they're not trying to put you down, but just in the course of conversation, there's this gut feeling inside of you that begins to think that, well, maybe what I did wasn't so great after all. And today, that's what I want us to talk about. I want us to talk about what is that. I want us to talk about for a few moments of what it is that takes us from thinking that we're A-okay to just being not so great. Because all of us felt it at times. In fact, that's one of the things that we talk about, and it's one of the things that I believe that makes adulting so hard. Because ultimately, and that's been the theme of this series, is we've been talking about this idea that adulting is hard. I mean, it's difficult. And to begin the series, we began talking about the definition of adulting is it's the mundane task that you have to do on a regular basis, right? It's showing up on time. It's paying your bills on time, right? It's paying your taxes. I mean, it's incredible how there is an entire arm of the government that is there and ready to teach you how to pay your taxes. If you do not pay your taxes, they'll knock on your door and they'll take things from you. I mean, they show us how we can pay our taxes. I mean, really, most of the mundane tasks in life, isn't it true? We can Google and we can figure out. We can run a little bit of a Google search or watch a couple YouTube videos, and we can figure out how to change the air vent in our vehicle. We can watch a few YouTube vehicles, and we can figure out how to set the alarm on our clocks. But ultimately, one of the things we've been saying on our phones, one of the things we've been saying throughout the course of the series is this, is why adulting is hard, is that it's often what lies beneath the surface of our adult hearts that keeps us from adulting well. It's not the mundane task, but it's what lies beneath. It's what's underneath you and I. It's what's underneath that keeps us from really being able to adult well. You know, for far too long, for you and I mean, we get fixated on the shiny. We get fixated on the polish. We get fixated on everything that's going right in everybody else's life. And what that does is that causes something underneath our lives to begin to challenge us. And we begin to think that maybe we don't have it all together. There's something deep beneath us that when we really set out to try to be who we want to be, that trips us up and makes adulting hard. And one of the things I want to challenge you, one of the things I believe is ultimately you and I, we lose sight of who we want to be when we focus not on who we were meant to be, but when we focus on who we weren't meant to be. We lose sight of who you could be. You think about who you could be. You think about the potential you have. You think about what lies ahead of you, and oftentimes we lose sight of what we could be when we focus on what we weren't meant to be. I mean, to ultimate reality, I mean, you've got the real you. You've got this idea of who you really are, who you were designed to be, your temperament, your Enneagram tells you a lot of that. I mean, you can do and take tests and make great generalizations about the real you. But isn't it true that oftentimes there's a different side of you that gets in the way of the real you, and it's the ideal you? We have this real and this ideal. We've got this idea that I've got it all together, and then we've got this idea that I'll never measure up. And somewhere in the middle of this real you versus ideal you, there's this challenge, this underlying, this struggle that you and I have. And what is this? What is this that causes us to have such a disconnect? Well, today, I really believe that very thing that lies beneath the surface, it's like a virus. I mean, it's a virus that keeps us from really being able to experience the real you. And there's a virus that lives within each one of us. And just like any virus, I don't know if you've ever had, I mean, I'm sure you've experienced kids with a virus. I mean, 3- and 4-year-olds, it's kind of fun. They pass it back and forth, right? It's like, hey, I've got a virus. Let me share. And it's funny because oftentimes a virus doesn't necessarily present itself the same way in everybody. I mean, for some people, it brings about vomiting and other forms of getting things out of your body. For some, it's sneezing. For some, it's just a runny nose. For some, it's a high fever. For some, I mean, you begin to think about all the different presenting symptoms that can show up with the underlying reality, the virus. Well, the virus that we're talking about today, it's got many different presenting symptoms. I mean, for some, it might be arrogance. For some, it might be bullying. You know, I've seen oftentimes that the genesis of bullying has more to do with this virus. This idea that I'm not who I'm meant to be. I'm not comfortable in my own skin. And so I want to make sure you're not comfortable in your own skin either, because it's just not okay. For some, it's the inability to make decisions. It's indecisiveness. We begin to just rethink everything we're trying to do, and we think that we'll never make the right decision. For some, this virus shows itself as avoiding conflict, fear, jealousy. For some, this virus will show itself as pride and thinking you've got it all together. But the reality is there is a virus that keeps us from really experiencing the real you. And every single one of us has that. Every single one of us has something inside of us that if we're not careful and we can't work through, it's going to come out in a multitude of different symptoms. And so, for today, the good news is I believe this virus has a name. I believe this virus actually has a name that many of us deal with on a regular basis. And that name is ultimately insecurity. It's this idea that I'll never measure up. And ultimately, this is a nasty virus. It plagues so many of us in ways that we never thought possible. Just when we thought we were able to take a step, all of a sudden we've got a whisper, we've got a voice coming inside of us, and we begin to think, oh, I thought I had it all together, and now I'm jealous again. And man, oh, I fought jealousy to its core, but then all of a sudden you find that you're angry at somebody. All of a sudden you've got anger and jealousy subsided, but then all of a sudden you begin to get prideful, like, I've got it all together. And isn't it true that when we aren't comfortable in our own skin, when we aren't comfortable in who God tried to make us or who God created us to be, it's when we become most dissatisfied with who we are. When we begin to try to be comfortable, when we're not comfortable with who God has made us, it begins to cause troubles. So what do we do with this? I hate to break it to you, and this is a great definition, sorry, for insecurity. When we aren't comfortable with who we are because we are consumed with who we aren't. When you think about this as the definition of insecurity, when we aren't comfortable with who we are, what causes this discomfort? I mean, for many of us, it's social media, isn't it? And I'm not trying to harp on social media today. That's not the aim. Don't worry. I have a love-hate relationship with Facebook and Instagram. It's always fun to see, oh, look what they're doing. But isn't it true when we are not comfortable with who we are because we become consumed with who we are. We become consumed with what everyone else is doing. We become consumed with what everyone else is. So today, what I want us to do is this, is I want us to look at an individual in the Bible. A guy by the name of David, or King David. David's an individual who I believe dealt with insecurity. I mean, you can look at his story and you can see this insecurity really breeded in his heart and his life. And yet, there's something inside his story that shows me, and I believe it'll show us, that he was able to overcome it. In fact, in David's story, you even see that by the end of David's life, God looked upon David and said, this is a man after my own heart. How could God look at him and say, this is a man after my own heart? I believe it's because David had become so secure in who God had made him to be that he was able to live that life out. So for us to really get down to who David is, I want us to go to a little bit of the backstory because I think it'll help us set the stage for where David is and how David got to where he is today. Many of you probably heard of King David. Many of you probably know the story of David and Goliath. Well, this is that same individual, that same guy that attacked Goliath, that had the security to go face to face, toe to toe, stone to sword with one of the greatest battle-tested warriors the Philistines had ever had. So let's pick it up in 1 Samuel chapter 16, verse 1. He says this, the Lord said to Samuel. And so basically the Lord's coming to Samuel. Samuel is the prophet of the time. Samuel is an individual that was God's voice to the Israelites during this period of time. And so Samuel, who it's his namesake, Samuel, the prophet, the Lord came to him and said, how long will you mourn for Saul? Typo. Since I have rejected him, and I'm not pointing any fingers at anybody but me because I typed that. Since I have rejected him as king over Israel. Why is this a big deal? Because Saul was the first king of Israel, and he was not quite the best king around. In fact, a lot of people thought less of him. A lot of people did not see him as a warrior. They saw him as somewhat of a coward at times. And so they were looking for the next king. And now, if you know anything about kingdoms, especially in those days, the typical successor to any king was the firstborn of that family. I mean, it just made sense that the king would pass on his kingdom to one of his blood, to his lifeline, to his kids. And so this is just throwing Samuel for a loop. He says, the Lord said, how long will you mourn for Saul since I have rejected him as king over Israel? Now fill your horn with oil and be on your way. I'm sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem. Samuel's in this moment thinking, okay, God, we get a new king. I guess you're going to redeem us. I guess there is hope. I guess something is going to come about. Now, you got to think that Saul, S-A-U-L, he was still on his throne at this time. Saul was still on his throne. He was still the king of the day. And he continues on in 1 Samuel 16:1. He says, I have chosen one of his sons, one of Jesse's sons, to be the king. So Samuel walks up to Jesse's house. I don't know if this is how it goes, but this is how it goes in my head. He walks up and he knocks on the door. Jesse opens the door and says, hey, it's the prophet. It's Samuel. Welcome. Come on in. And Samuel looks at Jesse and says, hey, I am here to find the next king of Israel. And Jesse's thinking, well, that's weird. Hey, and so Samuel tells Jesse, go and get all your boys. I want you to line them up. I want to have a parade of men so that I can see which one is going to be the next king, which is just awkward in and of itself. So Jesse goes and he gets all of his sons, or almost all of his sons, and he puts them in a single file line in front of Samuel, and Samuel gets the chance to look at all of these individuals and figure out which one of these men, which one of these boys is going to be the next king of Israel. And Samuel picks it up in verse 6, and he says this, when they all arrived, Samuel saw Eliab, and he thought, surely the Lord's anointed stands here before the Lord. He saw Eliab, and he thought, this has got to be the king. This has got to be the next individual to stand on the throne of Israel. But why did he think that? 16:7 tells us a little bit into what God sees. It says, but the Lord said to Samuel, do not consider his appearance or his height, for I've rejected him. So basically, Samuel's coming in and he sees Eliab and he's thinking, man, that guy has it all together. He's got looks, he's got height. I mean, if he's the king, everybody's going to follow him. He's got it all together. And God looks at Samuel and he says, hey, he's not the man. Do not consider his appearance or his height. And he continues on and he says this, the Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance. Isn't that true of us today? People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Remember how we defined insecurity? We defined it as this. It's when we aren't comfortable with who we are because we are consumed with who we aren't. You've got this idea where Samuel is looking at the outward appearance. He's seeing the outward appearance. He's seeing Eliab and he's thinking, this man has got to be the king because outwardly speaking, outwardly looking, he's got it all together. But isn't that the difference between security and insecurity? You've got the real you versus the ideal you. You've got the real you, which is ultimately who God designed you to be, but then we've got this other side, this ideal you. You've got the ideal you, the person you desperately want to be. Why do we want to be that? Because we see it in social media left and right. Why do we see this ideal you? I think it's because of the comments that people make. I mean, you think about the comments that people have made of you. They'll make comments, whether it's on social media or maybe it's just in the office, and they weren't intending it, but you log it back in the back of your brain and you begin to think, I'm never going to say that again. I'm never going to do that. I can't believe I didn't think about that. How dare me? I need to shore up everything around me so that people don't think of me that way. Our ideal you, it becomes defined by the comments that other people make, but not just the comments that other people make, it also becomes defined by the comparisons that other people have of you. They begin to compare you to other people. They begin to compare your marriage to other marriages. They begin to compare your ability to speak or your ability to be or your ability to do to other people. And you begin to take the comments, you take the comparisons, and what do? You internalize it and you begin to try to orchestrate this awkward ideal reality that you want people to see of you. Because you want people to like you. You want people to enjoy you. And you don't want the comments and comparisons to continue, so we shove it down and we try to be the ideal me. And isn't it true that most of the comments and comparisons are based upon outward appearance? Or based upon outward things that they see? Most of the comparisons we make on social media tends to be the highlight reel of other people based upon the real reality of me. We look at it and we begin to try to juxtapose. We begin to see the comments and the comparisons, and we create this ideal image of who we want to be. And this chasm between what is real and what is ideal, it affects us all. And I don't know about you, but I can only imagine that what happens in this scenario is probably not too far off to what's happened in many of our lives. In fact, Samuel's looking, and God says, okay, Samuel, here's the deal. This isn't the one. Eliab's not the one. You need to continue looking. You need to figure out who else is there. And I can only imagine Samuel's looking at the individuals, and he's saying, okay, wait a second. God said that of all the boys you have here, and you've lined up a lot, of all of these boys, there's not a single one that is going to be king. You must have another son. And Jesse's thinking, you don't want to know about that boy. Are you kidding me? Jesse's sitting here thinking, this guy's not the right prophet. He can't hear from God. There's no way that God would want that son to be the king. And Samuel's sitting here thinking, God, are you wrong? God, how can this be? Like, everybody in front of me is apparently these boys. It says in verse 11, it says that, so Samuel asked Jesse, said, are all of these the sons that you have? And he continues on, and he says, well, yeah, there's the youngest, Jesse answered, but he's a shepherd. I mean, yeah, there's the youngest, but he's tending sheep, and I can't help but think this probably wasn't the first time that David had been shunned by his father. I can't help but that insecurity that David has from time to time. I mean, we see it play out. There's a point in David's life where he's actually the king, and he sees this incredibly beautiful woman across the way, and he begins to think, that is somebody that I would love to be with. And so he has his merry men go and get this woman who happens to be married, and he commits adultery with her on the spot. And there's something inside of just about every adultery that comes from the source of insecurity. And so what does David do in that moment? He has the individual, he has Bathsheba's husband killed. Now, I don't know if every murder has a source of insecurity, but so much of the decisions we make have the core of insecurity. And many of the times it comes from our early years when we have an individual that maybe spoke wrongly of us or spoke to us in a different way. And I can't help but think that this was David's lot. That David is sitting here used to having his dad look down upon him. Well, here's the men, and then here's my shepherd boy. Here's the men that I have, and then, oh yeah, I've got that lowly shepherd boy. So how does Samuel respond? What do you think he says? And so in verse 12, Samuel continues. He says, so Jesse sent for him and had him brought in. And look at this. It says of David, he was glowing with health, and he had a fine appearance and handsome features. Samuel just can't get off this physical attraction, right? God looks at the heart, but apparently Samuel's sitting here saying, yeah, but I'm looking at, the king has got to be someone that garnishes respect, right? For whatever reason, Samuel proves that for many of us, comments and comparisons continue. This is an individual that had a fine appearance. Now, I don't know what fine appearance was in Samuel's days, but David had it. And it continues on, and he says this, then the Lord said, rise and anoint him. This is the one. David's the next king. The lowly shepherd boy. The man who was just supposed to be out in the field, who even the dad said there's no way you would ever want him to be. I mean, that is a great source of insecurity. The next chapter, David is tending his sheep, and there's this giant we alluded to earlier who's mocking the Israelites and calling them just ridiculous names, saying you're a bunch of cowards, you're ridiculous. And David, the lowly shepherd boy, grabs a couple stones and was so secure in who he was that he stood up to that giant, said, I can take him down. I mean, what is it that provides David with such security? What is it that provides David with this idea, this reality that I am who God said I am? There's this chasm, right, between the real you and the ideal you, and there's this insecurity that gets in the middle of it. There's the ideal you. This is who we want to become, the ideal you that comments and comparisons and social media and the vacations that everybody's taking and the life that everybody's living. And we're sitting here and we're trying to make sense of how do I become comfortable in my own skin? How do I get excited about the real me? Yet David, several chapters later, He would overcome Goliath. He would become an incredible king for Israel. And David made this statement. It's fascinating as you read the book of Psalms. When you read the book of Psalms, it's actually just a bunch of prayers that David prayed. It's actually a bunch of prayers that David, he wrote to God. He wrote as a source of him just being a poet and just saying, oh my goodness. And if you don't journal, I would encourage you to journal, because this is ultimately what David did. And David, who I believe was ridiculed and shunned by his father, who had all kinds of security and insecurity issues, David made this statement. As he's writing one of his Psalms, Psalms 139, 13 and 14, he made this statement. For you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. I don't praise you because I've actually lived up to my dad's expectations. I don't praise you because I finally got the corner office. I don't praise you because everybody finally loves me and I've aspired, I've hit the ideal me. He says, no, I praise you because the real me is fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know them full well. That is the statement of an individual who is incredibly secure in who he is. That is the statement of an individual who is incredibly secure in who God created him to be. Not necessarily secure in what everybody else wants him to be, but secure in who God created him to be. And so, how do we get through this? How do we make this our reality? Well, let's look at the ideal you. Ultimately, the ideal you is something we created. The ideal you is something that you created about yourself. You began to take in the comments. You began to take in the comparisons. And you begin to say, well, this is what I want to be. This is the ideal me. This is how I want people to perceive me. And we begin to build walls that we create to try to create the ideal me. But the reverse, the real you is ultimately, as David said so eloquently, the real you is who God created. The ideal you is who you create. It's the comments, the comparisons, it's the struggles, the frustrations. But being able to be secure in who God made you allows us to really fight through the real you. Now, I wish I could stand up here and be like, you got it. You can handle this. Let's go from here and let's be secure. But the reality is, even as a pastor, I struggle with this. I mean, if I can be honest, there's a lot of times that I'm disappointed in the real me that God created. There's times that I look at myself in the mirror, and from my profession, it's pastor talk, right? Like pastors are always getting together and how many you're running, you know, and it's like, what? I mean, and there's a lot of circles that I get to be the real me, and people are like, whoa, that's incredible. And then there's a lot of circles that I get to be the ideal me, and I'm like, oh my goodness, how did you do that? In 1 year, you were lying. You were paying people to come to church, dude. What's wrong with you? Right? Like, but there's this chasm between the real me and the ideal me. And to take it to another level, the ideal me, I mean, you want that to be true of me. You don't want to see me fail. You don't want to see me hurt other people. You would probably rather me be in a plastic box and just be the perfect pastor that you hope I am than really come to grips with the real me at times. And there's the tension there for me as I'm trying I'm trying to be secure in who I am, but I know I'm just a broken individual that really, from time to time, I'm not good at life. And so there's this tension between the ideal and the real, and I know that that's the case for many of us as well. Regardless of your profession, there's the ideal you that you so desperately want people to see as you, but we become disappointed in who God created us to be. We become disappointed in the real me because, well, we don't have it all together. We don't have what it takes. I want to be somebody I'm not. And so, God, you must not have created me right. You know, it's impossible to be secure in who God made you to be if you're disappointed with who God didn't make you to be. It's impossible for you to be secure in who God made you to be. God created you on purpose for a purpose. And it's impossible for us to be secure in that purpose if we're constantly looking at the comparisons and the comments and we're disappointed in God because He didn't make us who we want to be. So, insecurity, it lies within, it lies beneath, and it fights for each one of us. It'll show itself in multiple different symptoms. For some, it'll show ourselves in indecisiveness. For some, it'll show ourselves as anger, envy, jealousy. For some, guilt. For some, it will cause us to be bullies. For some, it'll cause us to be arrogant. For some, it'll cause us to be standoffish. For some, it'll cause us to be over the edge so that people, hey, don't look at my faults. I want you just to see my charm. So how do we get to the bottom of this? I want to give you 3 questions I want you just to think about. Because I believe that these 3 questions can be very pivotal questions when it comes to figuring out who God made you to be. The first question is this. Who were you as a child? Isn't it true that when it comes to kids, they're not worried? You ask my 3-year-old, my 4-year-old, and without any shame, they'll be like, I want to be a garbage man. You ask a 20-year-old, how many different people? You ask a bunch of 3, 4, and 5-year-olds who in this room is creative, and then you ask a bunch of 5th graders who's creative, and then you begin to ask a bunch of adults who's creative. The comments and comparisons in our lives begin to push us down. So I would encourage you, get back to who you were as a child. Begin to think about what was it that moved the needle when you were 4, 5, 6, 7. What was it in your life that really made you excited, that made you burn with joy? Who were you as a child? The next question I would ask you is this, is who are you when you're at your best? Think about that. Who are you when you're at your best? Where do you excel when you're at your best? I had this conversation last night with one of the guys that serves here at the church, and he goes, Scott, I think I know what, if you had the perfect job description, I know what it would be. But you know that's what this question is saying. What is that perfect job description for you? What do you do effortlessly? What do you excel at beautifully? For me, I love just hanging out with people. Too bad there's administrative sides to this job, but I love just being able to hang out, spend time, talk to, share lunch with, share coffee with, meet you at 5 in the morning. But what about you? Who are you when you're at your best? And where do you excel when you're at your best? And the last question is this, is are you seeking to become the healthy you or an unhealthy replica of someone else? I mean, if you get down to business, are you seeking to become the healthy version of you? Or are you trying to be a healthy replica of an unhealthy replica of somebody else? I would encourage you, take these 3 questions, dive into them, ask them, talk about them at lunch, talk about them in your small group, journal about them. Maybe if David had a journal and he had a heart after God, he had insecurity issues that became secure in who God created him to be. I would encourage you to take these questions and journal them out. Write them down. Because ultimately, there's the real you and there's the ideal you. The real you is who God created you to be. And the real you is going to be the happiest, the most joyful, the most life-giving individual you could ever be. Being in this rat race, trying to be the ideal you, does nothing more than give us insecurity. So here's how I want us to end. David made this prayer, this plead for security. And I want us to read this verse aloud together. Because I believe that this is a prayer that you and I can make. This is a prayer that we can have together, that we collectively can say, God, this is what I am choosing to believe. And I want to challenge you to make this your prayer. In Psalms 139, 13 and 14, I'm going to ask you to say it with me and then we'll be done. God, you created my inmost being. You knit me together in my mother's womb. I praise you because I'm fearfully and wonderfully made. Your works are wonderful. I know that full well. God, I ask that that would be true of us. God, the chasm between the real and the ideal can be so deafening. And that chasm can create difficulties when it comes to adulting. Not necessarily paying the bills or picking up our kids, but God, this secure versus insecure, this real versus ideal, this idea that I want to be comfortable in my own skin, but God, the truth of the matter is I would rather be an unhealthy replica of somebody else because they're liked. God, I pray that we would get to the bottom of that. God, I pray that you would allow us to be secure in who you've created us to be. God, I pray that over the next couple days that you would give us that ability to come face to face with those questions. God, to ask ourselves who we were as a child. To ask ourselves, what do we do great at? What do we excel at? And what are we natural at? And God, ultimately, I pray that we would honestly assess ourselves when it comes to, Father, are we trying to be healthy? Or are we trying to be an unhealthy replica of somebody else? God, we need you. God, insecurity breeds, insecurity is everywhere. And God, insecurity keeps us from being who you've called us to be. So God, help us to get a handle on it. Help us to be secure. Help us to be defined. Help us, Father, to see you. Jesus, we need you. We love you. And we thank you. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen. Amen.